Hi, everybody. Welcome to Celebrating Aviation with Mike Mashat. I've been in this business for more than 40 years. I've enjoyed a great career in aviation, but something that's remained from the very beginning to even today is building models. I spent many happy Saturdays as a youth back in New York at a hobby shop called Hobby Rama, looking at shelves that looked just like this. It was a pastime that we all did as kids back in the 50s and 60s. Here, this Revell catalog kind of epitomizes the experience of building a model with your dad and having Sis look on as you create these masterpieces at the dining room table every weekend. But it was a special time, and it was a neat thing to do. Some of us even became members of the Revell Master Modelers Club, which meant you spent enough money on kits that you qualified to become a master modeler, complete with a gold seal and a blue ribbon. Well, what it was all about was looking at the airplanes of the day. This is an American DC-6 at Santa Monica, the Douglas plant, but you'd fly on trips or see these things flying over your house. And so you wanted to go build a model. This is the DC-7 version. But Revell was one of the early companies. You had Lindbergh and Aurora, Hawk, Comet, Strombecker, all the different companies. And they were all making models of the airplanes that were flying at that time. Here's what the actual model looked like. It was an amazing time for military airplanes, the Century Series Air Force fighters, the first supersonic family of airplanes was in flight test or going into service. And buying a model of the latest, hottest new jet was really exciting. Jet travel and commercial airlines was just beginning, the dawn of the jet age in the late 50s. Here you see the Boeing 720, but the DC-8, Convair 880, all the first generation jetliners were represented in models as well. And most exciting, we were beginning the very early phase of the space age. And so we weren't quite in orbit yet in the late 50s, but we had the North American X-15 rocket plane taking man into outside the Earth's atmosphere and into the lower regimes of space for the very first time. And you could build a model of it. I'd like to talk about the box art and some of the artists that depicted the cover art for these pieces. Let's start with Jack Lenwood. Lenwood worked at Northrop as an illustrator and did pieces like this T-38 concept proposal illustration you see here. And he was able to employ some of these ideas for Revell, depicting a gift set of supersonic jet fighters. Richard Kashati was Revell's first art director and first cover artist. He was Hungarian-born, flew Me-109s in World War II, and was a very talented artist and concept originator. Here you see the Sikorsky S-55 helicopter that he did. John Steele was an amazing talent. He was brought something different to box art. Usually everybody was into tight, accurate, rivet counting type illustrations, and Steele brought a tight looseness or a loose tightness, however you want to say it, more painterly approach to depicting the models. I will share with you that the USS Ranger was the first model I ever bought just to have the cover. This was so exciting. You were standing on the wing of this FJ Fury as it comes into land from, well, the wrong side of the pattern and with another one just hitting the 3-wire, but who cared? It was a stunning illustration and a beautiful model as well. Joe Catula illustrated for Aurora. He was kind of the senior elder statesman of model box top art. He illustrated all the Model Airplane News magazine covers, and literally hundreds of those. But he had a different type of technique, almost a transparent watercolor. There was a delicacy to his work that was yet quite dramatic as well. Mort Kunstler also did gouache renderings for Aurora. And I should point out, these were all water-based mediums, gouache, watercolor, combination of the two, because these artists didn't have the time to work with oil and have the drying times involved in that. These deadlines were pretty tight. And of course, the great Ray Gadke of Lindbergh, one of the best airbrush artists ever, doing his magic for the Lindbergh line. And Monogram had Dick Loescher and Tom Morgan as well. But I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about Jack Lenwood. As I said, he was the man. And he just had a style and a look that was just unlike anybody else in the business. His term was crowding the box. I had the pleasure and honor of meeting him through the Society of Illustrators of Los Angeles. We became friends, and I spent many many long happy hours at his home listening to the stories of how he did these covers. But he always talked about having the airplanes just literally exploding out of the frame of reference at you. And he would employ things like a dead front view of the Lancaster coming in to, I guess, attack the ME-262, not quite sure. But again, it really didn't matter. You were just so captivated with this composition, the contrails and everything. It was just, the action was just unbelievable. Here we have two F-105s dive bombing from 40,000 feet in a thunderstorm. These things would never happen in real life, but again, it didn't matter. And I say this with great respect and great awe at how these covers were put together. I don't mean any of these comments to be derogatory. It's just an observation that for a 12-year-old kid, you looked at this type of scene, the action, the excitement, the drama, the color, and you just had to have this kit for 79, 89, or 98 cents. Here we have Operation Deep Freeze, the great Antarctic exploration in the late 50s, the Navy version of the H-19 helicopter. And look at how dramatic the figures are in this thing, the action of the poses of the figures, the fellow in the foreground there in the parka at the extreme left, waving to the pilot. You wanted to be that guy. These covers probably spawned many careers in aviation and maybe even in the military, but you just had to be a part of this. And artistically, look at the waving figure's right hand and notice the V of the thumb and the fingers juxtaposed to the inverted V of the fins on the tail boom of the helicopter. Just little touches like that that would attract your eye and make you look at it and hopefully buy the kit. One of my favorites, a portrait of Bob Hoover, literally in the cockpit of Old Yeller, his famed P-51 that he flew for Rockwell. And this is a great example of a phenomenon we call spatial tension. Learned about this in art school. I'll tell you about that in a second, but take a look at Hoover's figure in the cockpit. And then come on down to the lower left portion of the composition and look at that right wingtip almost touching the ground. That's spatial tension. It creates a visceral reaction like, oh my gosh, it's going to hit. And this is depicting the famed Tennessee Waltz, where Hoover would rock back and forth on one wheel while landing in the Mustang and just captivating the air show crowds. But Lenwood sure pulled it off. This is Jack's first cover for Revell, done in 1956. He was recruited by Dick Casciati from Northrop and was enticed to create covers for Revell because they were starting to ramp up production to the point where they needed a second artist. Well, ironically, Jack produced, by his own count, 625 covers for Revell and also Aurora and a couple of car companies. But the neat thing about his technique is he would play tricks on us. And I say us as the 12-year-old kids that were salivating and waiting to see the next new release from Revell or any of the companies. But he would play little tricks, and by his own admission, he did that to attract our eye, get us to look at it, and again, buy the kit and take it home. So here we have a C-130. This happens to be Van Nuys Airport, is where he researched the background. And you notice the sun angle. Look at the airplane, the shadow on the ground. The sun is from the right side. Look at the control tower in the back. The sun's from the left. I call that a Lenwoodism. We're going to see some more. In fact, this is one of my favorites. But before we get into the illustration, this is called a box wrap. This is the outer sheet, a thin sheet of gloss paper that is literally wrapped around a hard cardboard box top. And if you've ever built these and you saw that turquoise band on the inside of the box, that's what this is. So you see the side panels and the end panels, and then the cover of the kit as it would appear on the shelf. But this has to be the prize winner for the most audacious trick ever played, probably in any model box top. You have the A3J Vigilante being catapulted off the deck of a Midway class carrier. Take a look at the island. Where is that? All right, here's the carrier. This is the Coral Sea, but take a look at the island, the two levels of windows, the smokestack, the mast, the antennas. That's a good 450 feet aft of the leading edge of the bow. Take a look at it in this illustration. Jack has it floating in space about 50 yards to the right of the carrier, about 100 feet above the flight deck. But you know what? It doesn't matter. I remember being in the hobby shop and looking at this and going, oh my gosh, I have to have this. Look at the island of the carrier. Look at all that detail. And it wasn't until years later that I really took a long, hard look at this and just went, you got to be kidding me. My friends know this story by heart, but I remember the first time that I saw this model in a window in a stationery store on the west side of Manhattan, walking with my grandfather and staring at this kit in the window. But what was interesting is here's California with the palm tree, and the folks are getting ready to board the plane, and everybody's in shirt sleeves, and it's nice and warm and sunny. And I was standing in the middle of a blizzard in January, I think of '58, staring at this box and wondering what planet was this place on, because we were staying there in freezing cold weather. And I remember thinking to myself, wherever this is, I'd like to go there someday. One of my favorite airliner covers, this is the Sud Caravel and SAS markings, but taking off from somewhere near Paris because there's the Eiffel Tower. But here's another Lenwoodism. Take a look at those Swissair Caravels in the background. You see the first one, the guy up on the wing refueling it in the fuel truck. And there's the tail of the second one. Where's the rest of the second airplane? Take a good look. Gotcha. This is what Jack called his European wet look technique. Here's the Ferry Rotodyne. And yeah, it's raining. And, he had a trip to Europe in the late 50s and was very taken with the weather and the atmospherics. And so the secret to this look was not using any pure white gouache. This is #1 gray, where white would normally be used. And that gives it a toned down, kind of a cold, wet feel to it. And he employed this on any number of covers at that time period. Here's a beautiful P6M Seamaster rocketing away from, dropping mines in a shipping lane in full afterburner, which the airplane didn't have. But again, it really didn't matter. It was all about the look of the art. And notice how beautifully Jack juxtaposed the sections of airplane structure against the clouds, dark against light, light against dark. And of course, there's the freighter down there below, or the tanker. Just a masterful illustration. Of course, even space flight. Look at the structure inside the service bay there on the left. And of course, the astronaut doing the spacewalk outside the Gemini capsule. And, oh, look, they just happened to be over Cape Canaveral, Florida. This was a series of kits issued in the early 70s, the 32nd scale World War II fighters. And these were by far Jack's favorite covers to do. As he said, they were big enough to get juicy with them. You could get into all sorts of detail and action. And he said these were his absolute favorites. Look at the snow and where's the searchlight next to the runway that's lighting this airplane? Just a fantastic play of light and shadow and color and action. Well, believe it or not, this is Jack's most popular, most well-known cover of all the 625 he did, the Memphis Belle. You can mention to anybody, whether they're into airplanes or not, about Revell models. Like, oh, I had the B-17, I had the Memphis Belle. And again, dive bombing from high altitude. Well, no, but Jack had a way with the color and the action and the use of flak, the spacing of the bombs. That's all designed to create excitement and action and drama. Thought you'd like to see what a cover looks like without all the copy and the Revell logo. This is the Snark missile, just the bare artwork, gouache on illustration board. And you notice that the artists gave a lot of room around the subject. And this was so that the art directors and designers, graphic designers, could add the type and the logos and whatever else they wanted to put on there, and had plenty of room to play with. This is a Casciati rendering of the Douglas X3 Stiletto. Beautiful little kit from Revell. How many of you remember the dark green cockpit glass? But you ever wonder how they compose these covers? Well, believe it or not, they use a mock-up of the model and a grid and a shoebox and a couple of G.I. Joe action figures. And that's how they compose the basic idea for a cover that looks like this. Build-ups were a big part of it also. These are the store window displays that you'd see in the window of the hobby shop to entice you to come in and buy the model. This is the Nike Hercules. But with the action figures and articulating launching pad that raised up and down, it was just a beautiful, beautiful kit. But an example of what you would see in a hobby shop window to show you what the finished product would look like. And don't forget to set those launch controls. A beautiful buildup of the P2V Neptune. Again, Operation Deep Freeze. This is a reissue of the original kit, which was done in silver. But just what they call out of the box. I mean, literally brush painted. and just a neat weekend project that you could do all on your own. A beautiful buildup of the Lindbergh Convair Pogo. This was a vertical takeoff and landing turboprop, and the model had a little gear system up in the prop hub there where the propellers would actually contra-rotate as you spun them around. Private planes, as they were called, were also done in models. This is the monogram Piper Tripacer, the very first airplane I ever flew at a little airport on Long Island called Zons, and we're going to be seeing that in a few moments. The Convair Tradewind, a beautiful model from Revell, and that base was called the revolving stand. There was a ball that was mounted to the bottom of the model that fit into a little spring-loaded receptacle, and you could angle the model any position you wanted. It was a novel idea, as long as you didn't forget the ring. WV2 Warning Star. This is an interesting concept in that it's a reissue of an airliner. Revell originally had the Eastern Super G Connie and then reissued it as the military radar version, but an example of how one kit would lead to another and they would get extra mileage out of the molds. What you see is what you get. This is a beautiful example of seeing box art, a lovely little kit from Aurora, the SNJ. This is the Navy version of the North American T6 Texan. The model went together beautifully and really looked like the airplane, as even in that small size. And then you have this. This is a classic. The box art above is the second issue of this kit. It says X-15 rocket-powered airplane, but it originally came out in 1959 as the X-15 satelloid airplane, and that's what you see in the buildup down below. Take a look at the two shapes there, and you'll notice it's quite different. Jack Lenwood did about a dozen covers for Aurora. This is one of his best. The X-15 rocketing into space really looks like the airplane, but the buildup below is odd. It didn't resemble the real airplane at all. And why is that? Well, here's a NASA cutaway. Take a look at the shape of the wing, the tail, the swept back stabilators back there by the tail, the shape of the cockpit, the proportions. Aurora took this 3-view out of Aviation Week, which came out in February of '58. The model came out a little less than a year later, and it was this, the satelloid plane. So they had to change the cover to look like the real airplane, even though inside was the wrong shape. That's the real airplane, quite a difference. Again, the machines of that era, the airliners of that era could be depicted in models. This is a beautiful buildup of the monogram Super G Connie, complete with stewardesses, as they were called, standing on the tops of the ramps there, and a little tug at the lower left. And finally, life imitates art. This is a Mort Kunstler depiction of the Aero Commander at Zons Airport. I'd mentioned that earlier. That's a little field on Long Island. Came about after World War II, was training pilots on the GI Bill and became one of the busiest, in fact, I believe the busiest New York area general aviation airport in the 50s and 60s. Fell into disrepair and finally was closed in 1979. But this kit was issued in '61. And Zons was in Amityville, Long Island, which was all of maybe 12 or 15 miles from the Aurora plant in West Hempstead. So it's conceivable that they sent Mort out there to take pictures. But lo and behold, that green airplane that you see facing us in the Ansai view above is this airplane at Zons. There was an actual Aero Commander owned by a gentleman who used it for Part 135 charter work and also an aerial ambulance. I know this because I got a job there as a line boy in 1966, just before I went in the Air Force. And I actually drove that Gulf gas truck. I climbed that wood ladder and I refueled this airplane many, many times, often with the owner in the cab of the truck flooring it. So it would up the flow rate of the hose there, and I had to hang on for dear life, but he was getting ready to launch an air ambulance mission occasionally, and he'd want to get going. The yellow and white airplane is actually on runway heading, runway 18. And this is just as accurate a scene as you could ever imagine, except for that Rolls Royce at the left. I don't ever recall seeing one of those. This is me demonstrating the advanced ground handling technique of the Piper J3 Cub. It was a great job. It was really fun. And this is also the first airplane I ever soloed. Those hangars in the background, by the way, were used in the filming of the movie Spirit of St. Louis. Jimmy Stewart and those scenes of getting aboard the airplane and suiting up and saying goodbye to everybody were filmed literally in front of that hangar that you see just below the tail of the Cub. So there you have it. A look at models. We're going to be doing more in the months ahead, and I hope you'll join us. And I do thank you for celebrating aviation with Mike Machat.